Hello, my name is LoG, and today we're going to talk about how I develop and get comfortable with a sound like the one in this short. With our dominant seventh leads inside of this bar chord, it's important to note that certain genres will approach the sound differently by featuring certain notes. So if you think of a rock player like Joe Satriani or a jam band like Grateful Dead, they like to do this sort of thing. 1-3-5 standard major, plus flat 7 of course, but they'll also play a lot of 4. 1-3-4-5 flat 7. Or 1-3-4-5 flat 7 like we did the other day. Listen to this lick. I'm playing a ton of this 4 right there. 1-3-4, 5 flat 7, 4, 1. Even this little bend, that's me playing 3 up to 4 and back. When we play a lot of this 4, you're turning the chord into kind of a suspended chord, which is a little softer sounding than normal dominant. Here's a longer passage. So remember, if you like the sound, think major with flat 7 plus the 4. All right, so today I'm going to talk about this specific sound and basically what it is, how I approach it, and how I would take a sound like this, like a very specific sound, and develop it into ideas that I could use in my writing or in my normal playing. Hopefully they come out in my improvising, all of that good stuff. So keep in mind, I don't expect you to just copy the stuff I'm playing. Like, I'm not really here to show you licks. It's more showing you my process of coming up with ideas so that you can maybe copy that process or take notes from that process and develop your own sounds. Because ideally, that's what you should be doing. You shouldn't always be looking to copy everyone else all the time. You need to be developing these ideas yourself, because if you're comfortable with developing licks and ideas, you don't ever need to copy anyone's licks. You can just constantly make your own, take some ideas from other people, but you'll basically have a never-ending pool of ideas to choose from. That is how it should be done. So what is this sound? Let's just talk about it real fast. So I'm going to do this on B, just to kind of keep it centered around the fretboard. The sound is B7, so 1-3-5 flat 7. If I just play like a simple arpeggio right here, 1-3-5 flat 7, plus the 4. The 4 is the key note, because if we play just normal dominant seventh without the 4, it does not sound the same as it does with the 4. The 4 adds this kind of, I talked about it in the short, this like suspended flavor that softens the sound of dominant, right? Dominant seventh in of its nature is a slightly dissonant sound, primarily because of the distance between 3 and flat 7. So if I play 1, here's 1, 3 is right there, flat 7 is right here. This, of course, is called a tritone. It is considered in most circles to be a lightly or mildly dissonant interval. But when we throw in the 4 and we start to feature that 4, your ear hears the distance between 4 and flat 7 instead of 3 and flat 7. Of course, depends on how you play it, obviously. But if I do something like this, if I do a lick like that, what did I just play? 1, 3, 5, 3, 4, flat 7, 1. So notice your ear heard 4 to flat 7, because that's how I organized it in the lick, and it did not necessarily hear 3 to flat 7, at least as strongly as it would if I didn't play the 4. And what is the distance between 4 and flat 7? That would be a fourth, right? Fourths are nowhere near as dissonant as a tritone. So by sneaking in this 4 into the sound, we're allowing ourselves to soften the blow, the very mild blow. Dominant seventh is not that dissonant of a sound, but it can sound a little quirky and is honestly not really everyone's favorite sound. There are some artists that do not play dominant, but this is a way that you can still play dominant, still play major with flat 7, but have it sound a little smoother by introducing that 4. Very common sound, very common figure. So another thing, many people will hear this and they will immediately say, oh, I'm playing Mixolydian, okay? Nothing necessarily wrong with thinking that, but two things. Number one, it's not necessarily correct, because by saying this sound is Mixolydian, you are saying the sound of 1, 3, 4, 5, and flat 7 is always Mixolydian, and that is incorrect. There are other situations where this sound exists that is not Mixolydian, okay? So just as an example, if I were to play this exact same sound, but sneak in a flat 2, that is not Mixolydian, that is something else. right? So just by saying this core group of notes, 1, 3, 4, 5, flat 7 is by default mixolydian is not correct. It's really just a core sound that can be mixolydian if you want to add the notes, the rest of the notes that make that sound, but it really can be a bunch of things. In reality, I kind of don't ever think about that terminology. I don't ever categorize sounds as these like very specific things because they're not really that. A lot of these sounds can live in a variety of different worlds and different sounds, and I think it's much more valuable to just think about the notes. What are the notes I'm playing? I'm playing 1, 3, 5, flat 7, basic dominant seventh, plus one other note. Because I can keep it simple like that, and I'm always thinking about the core ingredients that make this sound what it is, and not just lumping it into a scale, I have a little bit more control over the sound. And not to mention, if I'm always playing and thinking about the literal numbers under my fingers, I know how to access these sounds because I know exactly where they are, which I'll show you here in a second as I develop this idea. So keep that in mind. A lot of people like to immediately apply names, scale names to like everything they do. I personally think that's a bad idea, but do whatever makes the most sense to you. Personally, I do not do that. So anyway, with all that in mind, let's talk about some licks, or basically kind of the way that I approach developing the sound around the fretboard. So step one for me is just finding an easy fingering for this sound that sounds good, feels good, kind of makes sense visually and physically to play. And then from there, I will develop any other ideas by maybe chopping it up into smaller pieces or looking for different opportunities to mess around inside of this shape. So the shape that I personally like for this sound looks like this. So this is kind of nice for multiple reasons. Number one, I'm not starting on the root. So the root is actually the second note of that phrase. I'm starting on flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5. It's very common that when people start developing ideas, they just always start on the root all the time because it's kind of a nice foundation to start on, but sometimes a little boring. So, looking for opportunities to not start on the root, kind of cool. So that's what this one is, starting on flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5. I also like that it's pretty easy to play. I can do a lot of hammer-ons. It's only on 2 strings, so it's not like super pick intensive. And it also is pretty copy and pastable around different octaves. And that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to take this figure and play it on every B on the guitar. I'm doing this on B, that's my root. And I'm going to take note of any modifications that I have to make. If you're familiar with standard tuning, you should know that if you take a 2-note figure like this, it's going to look identical on every pair of strings except for the G string moving to the B string, because that's where the tuning issue of the guitar exists. So if I show you that, you'll see what I mean. So here it is off of that root right there, flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5. Here it is off the next B right here on the D string, flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5. B here on the B string, flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5 looks identical. If I do it on the A string right here, same thing, flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5 looks identical again. I could do it down here with the open. But then when I get to the G string, it does not look the same. Obviously, that is not correct because all of these notes have to be moved up a fret as you generally have to do when you are transitioning from the G string to the B string. So that looks like this. Flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5, right? A little awkward to play because I do have to make a little position jump that I don't really have to do necessarily for the others. So this is an opportunity where I will immediately say, okay, little awkward on this pair of strings. Is there another fingering that I can use? And because I know the distances between these notes, I can find another fingering pretty fast. And naturally, I would probably do this. So what am I doing right there? I'm simply moving the location of the last note, the 5. Flat 7, 1, 3, 4, 5. Instead of playing this note here, I play it right there. So how did I know that? First of all, I know this is F sharp and so is that, but I also know the distance, right? I can see 4 and 5 as a whole step. Well, I know on the guitar, this is a whole step, but so is this, right? On 1 string, up 2 frets, but on 2 strings, you play a note, go down a string, back 3 frets, that is a whole step. Of course, unless you are doing this on the annoying G to B strings, and then it won't look like that, it will look like this. Something to keep in mind, memorizing all these little interval distances. So we're going to talk more about messing around with fingering later on in the video, but keep in mind those little things. I think they're pretty valuable. So now coming back to my core shape, I'll do it right here on the D string, G string. I'm going to start to do things like that. Notice I'm just messing around, and I notice kind of an interesting little opportunity. I kind of did this in the short, and that's a little bend from 3 to 4. So that to me is nice. It's valuable. So I'm going to just look at that tiny sound right there and do it in every octave off of every B. So not only do my hands see it, but maybe my ears can hear it a little bit easier. And it just gives me a higher chance for this tiny little idea to come out naturally in my playing. So I'm immediately going to do that, right? Even right here on the different fingering, I know where that 3 is. A little bit different, but not too bad, actually. Not too bad right there. Maybe I'll do it up an octave on the same set of strings. A little tricky, but you figure out your fingering. Then on the A string. Again, just looking for little opportunities, playing them all over the fretboard. Then once I'm doing that, I'll start to very simply improvise, very simply, nothing crazy, and see if I can sneak those sounds in within the same sort of dominant world. Okay, so that's starting to get into my ears, get into my hands. I can start to see the shapes and when I can hit them. Nice. That's kind of what you want. You experiment with those sounds until they become a natural part of your playing. Notice, this is very important, notice how small and tiny this idea is. I'm not necessarily practicing like these monster licks all over the fretboard, even though that is cool. The thing that is a little bit not my favorite thing about these gigantic licks, which you can make, is you don't want to be forced into playing a gigantic lick all the time. If you have a phrase like this and only practice it like a gigantic lick, if I only practice this, for example, like that's the 3-octave lick from bottom to top. If I only practice it like that, I would probably only be able to play it like that, right? You think, oh, because I can do the whole thing, that means I can stop anywhere or start anywhere. Not necessarily. You kind of have to practice these monster licks that you're creating in small pieces as well, because you don't want to always be forced into a giant lick. You want to use these little pieces. That's kind of how you create this really nice, interesting mixture of ideas, right? It's kind of the same problem when people practice arpeggios. They always practice these like monster arpeggios, and when they play them, they're kind of forced into always doing the entire thing. Well, what happens if you don't want to do the entire thing? You only want to do 3 notes of it because you haven't necessarily practiced the shape in a small little chunk. You're forced into the larger thing. So keep that in mind. These small little shapes, I think, are super valuable. They kind of give you like little puzzle pieces you can use to connect to other puzzle pieces to create a more interesting sound. So again, you just experiment with little shapes like that. You know, maybe if you want to get a shape that sounds maybe a little more jumpy, like the one I was just doing right there, is very simple. Maybe I want to do something a little bit more jumpy. Let's try something like this. So that's kind of cool. I see 2 fifths in a row I can play right there. Flat 7, 1, 5, 3, 4, 1, right? Also, notice what I'm doing right there. Calling off the numbers as I'm creating the lick. It grounds me on the fretboard. It trains my ear to hear those numbers alongside the note. So I tie the number sound along with the actual note sound. Super important. And then maybe I'll do that in 2 octaves. Let's see what that sounds like. Just end with an extra little jumpy thing right there. Get a little, almost like a little reverse power chord out of this. Kind of cool. And maybe I'll practice that as a big monster lick, or maybe I'll practice it in little tiny pieces. All of that is valuable. You just want to do it all so you have these sounds available. As I'm up here, I kind of noticed this last little figure I played. Actually, I kind of noticed something else that's a really common lick. Watch this. Descending 5, 4, 3, 1, and then 5 on the bottom. How many times have you heard that? It's one of the most common like rock licks of all time. Kind of snuck in the flat 7 right there, but even just not doing the flat 7, just 5, 4, 3, 1, 5, 4, 3, 1, 5, 4, 3, 1, super popular. On my Patreon, I have a series called Corny Licks to Save the Day, and these are licks that I think are kind of corny, but are also valuable, and one of them is called the 4, 3, 1 triangle, because that is what this is right here. That's 4, 3, 1. The reason why I call it that because it looks like a little triangle. I guess you have a little triangle, whatever. But that's what I call it. But that is a very, very common little figure that makes up a litany of rock songs. So yeah, very popular little shape. Again, you notice little things like that, work through them, see what kind of sounds you can get. I don't know. Let's see if I can find one more. So in this little figure right here, how about this? That's kind of similar to the bendy one I was doing earlier. Kind of weird to do the hammer-on pull-up with the ring middle. That's still pretty cool. But that shape is kind of nice. Let me just run that multiple octaves again, see what it sounds like. Have you ever heard Raspberry Jam Delta V, I think, by Satriani? Starts with this phrase, this exact lick. Right? It's the same exact thing, just with little pull-offs to the open B string. But what is that again? Flat 7, 1, 4, 3. Super important to always know these numbers because that, again, grounds you on the fretboard. So once you have some basic ideas and they're starting to come out and you're playing, all of that is great. The next thing I do is try to take a sound like this and combine it. Instead of just looking for musical ideas, I try to look for technical ideas, because sometimes having a strong kind of technical idea attached to the sound can make coming up with really interesting ideas much easier. So here's how this is going to go. I'm going to come up with a very simple right-hand configuration that is comfortable for me, and then I'm going to run that picking pattern on every set of strings, and the notes that I choose for my left hand, I'm going to mold around the notes of the sound we're currently talking about, which is dominant 7th, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, plus the 4. So I'll show you what I mean. Here's the picking pattern, just to keep it really simple. One of the ones I like quite a bit. I'm going to pick a string, hammer on somewhere on that string, then pick the next string, middle finger, pick the next string, ring finger. So if I do just a pattern like this, right, pretty comfortable, feels good for my right hand. So what I'm going to do now is pick a location to start these ideas and then build all the way down using every single group of strings. So I'll show you what I mean. So we're doing B7 still. So I'm going to play down here. What note am I going to start on? This F sharp. Why would I start right there? Because that's the 5th of B. How do I know? Well, first of all, I know the 5th of B is F sharp, but I also know if this is B, which it is, 5th is always here, right? I can play 1 to 5 or 1 to 5. It's always where it is. So from here, I've got my starting note. According to my lick, I'm going to pick a note on the string and then hammer on to the next note. What is the next note of the pattern? This is 5. The next note will be flat 7, right? Which will be where? Up 3 frets, as it always is, 5 to flat 7. Then I'm moving to the next string. In this case, I'm just going to grab this root right here. And then the next string, I'm going to play the 4th right above that. Kind of cool. Get a little chord out if I want to. Kind of ascending and descending right there. Cool. Now I've got this set of strings. The same exact thing on the next set. Where am I going to start? The note that I played already, the root. I'm going to hammer on to the next note of the sound, which is what? 3, right? You might think, oh, I'm just going to hammer on to 2, which you can. But remember, I'm trying to abide by our sound, and our sound is just 1, 3, 4, 5, flat 7. So 1 to 3 right there. Bit of a stretch, but pretty cool. Next note on the next string is 4. Next note on the next string is flat 7, right? 1, 4, flat 7. That stack, always pretty easy to locate. So 1, 3, 4, flat 7. Pretty cool. Kind of tough to play. A little muddy sounding in this low register, but it sounds really nice in the high register when we get there. So let's run everything. Those 2. First one. Next one. Pretty cool. I'm just going to continue on the next strings. This will be 4, 5, flat 7, 3. I could do 4, 5, flat 7, 4, or 4, 5, flat 7, 1 with the open B string, but I'll do the 3 right here. It gives it that dominant flavor. It's basically a dominant 7th chord. Okay, final string will be flat 7, 1, 4, and then 5. Again, how am I choosing these notes? I'm just thinking about the note I'm starting on that string, hammering on to the next note available, then the next string, and just experimenting basically. So I'm going to run all of these. Maybe end on this top note. Every single note I'm playing there lives inside of this sound that we're talking about, dominant 7th plus the 4. But by forcing myself to abide by this finger pattern, I'm getting all these interesting ideas that maybe I wouldn't have come up with just naturally. So giving myself a very obvious template, follow this picking pattern, right? Pick, hammer on, next string, it's allowing me to more easily discover these ideas. Now, it might be cool to run this entire thing like a big monster lick, but it's also kind of nice just to notice the small little pieces, like I mentioned earlier, that I might find valuable. Like this one, that's kind of nice, just very simple, very casual dominant 7 sound right there. But then this one's also cool too, right? Getting a 3, 4, flat 7 at the same time. It's kind of nice, and that's very easily discoverable by doing this process, forcing myself to abide by a particular right-hand technique and molding the notes around that sound to fit the technique. Once I have that and they're all comfortable, cool, I'll grab my ideas, whatever, practice as much as I need to. Then I will do the same thing, but start on the next note of the sound. So notice I started here on this F sharp, mostly because that's the lowest note I can play in this area. Then I'm going to start where? The next note, which would be what? The flat 7, A in this case. And then I do everything right here. So what would that look like? I'll kind of speed up the process. So this will be flat 7, hammer onto 1, then 3, 5, change my fingering a bit. Next one will be 3, 4, 5, 1 right there. That one's nice to get a straight up suspended chord. That's really nice. Again, just these shapes are just manifesting themselves naturally as I force them into this technique and abide by the sound. The next one is this 5 flat 7 1 3. I could play 5 flat 7 1 4, which is really nice too. I don't know. I kind of like both of them. This one's the more dominant flavor. That one, of course, is more suspended. Both cool. Next one, this is an interesting one. 1 to 3, kind of a big stretch. I'll play 1 3 4 flat 7 right there. This one might sound familiar because it's the same as this one, just doing it up an octave. Looks different because of the tuning of the guitar, but pretty cool. This one I also kind of like doing this. So I'm basically playing 1 3 4 and then 1 again. It's kind of cool. Pull off the flat 7, I can always do that. Maybe dive into like another lick. I just slid up to a higher position. Cool. So you see what I'm doing here. This one, for some reason, is cool. I like it. I like the sound. I like the figure. So I'm extracting that from the creative exercise and trying to improvise with it, trying to mess around, see if I can find a natural way to get in and out of it. That's the point of doing these. It's not necessarily create monster licks, even though that's cool. It's really noticing little shapes that you might not come up with otherwise to use in your playing. Nice, so that's that position. And then obviously I would continue to the next position. So I did it all starting here, and then I did it all starting here. Now I'm gonna do it starting here. This is the root, so what are we gonna do? 1 3 4 flat 7. That should sound familiar. I've already done it 3 times. 1 3 4 flat 7. 1 3 4 flat 7. Now doing it here. 1 3 4 flat 7. Again, the shape is just naturally happening because I'm giving myself rules. Here's a picking pattern. Here are the notes. Make them work. Right? Let's continue. 1 3 4 flat 7. Next string 4 5. I'll play flat 7. You can play 3, which is cool. That's basically what this one was. But right here, I kind of like this. I like this sound. This is 4 5 flat 7 4. I like this sound on these set of strings. It's nice and warm. Sounds really cool. So I'll do that one just for fun, see what happens. Next string, I'm on flat 7. I'm going to play this. Flat 7 1 3 4. That gives us one of the shapes that we were talking about in one of the shorts, which is really nice. Let me run all that. The last one, I'm going to play this. I'm on 3 already. That's going to be the next string. Remember, a note, hammer on or slide in this case. Next string, next string. Gives me a nice little suspended. That's the same as this, just up an octave. And maybe I'll grab a high 4 or something. Kind of cool. Maybe come down to the root. That's nice. Let me try some. Oh, okay. All right, so I actually like that a lot better. So what I'm doing here is doing this lick. Instead of coming down to 1 right here, I see 4 1. I'm going to come down 4 flat 7. I like that a lot. So the cool thing about this is that all of these notes, it's basically every note of the sound except for the flat 7, and I kind of surprise you with the flat 7 as the last note. Really cool. I'm a big fan of that one. Kind of awkward to play, but hey, it's worth it. So you see the process, right? I'm just doing this picking pattern, molding the notes around the picking pattern and noticing little figures that I like. I definitely discovered a bunch of figures in there that I thought were pretty cool that I can hopefully extract, see if I can casually kind of land on them in my playing. But that's really the process. I love doing this because it basically forces you to abide by these rules, and that gives you new ideas that you might not come up with otherwise. So now that we've done a bunch of different creative exercises, kind of discovering different ways to combine these notes, the first one was this little simple pattern, flat 7 1 3 4 5, that we were playing all over the fretboard, maybe connecting a bunch of them together like this. And the other one, we were kind of taking those same notes, but abiding by a particular right-hand pattern. In this case, it was pick, hammer on, finger, finger, what we just did. That one sounded like this. Which is very cool. The next thing to do is just look at everything you're doing and look for opportunities, basically. And one of those main opportunities is different fingering. So let's say I'm doing one of the first shapes we played, this one, right? Flat 7 1 4 3, and I kind of like this shape, 4 3 flat 7, just that by itself. Kind of brings out a little bit of that dominant 7th flavor because we're ending with 3 and flat 7, giving us that tritone sound. But for some reason, let's say I don't like this. I don't like this fingering. So what am I going to do? Take the 4, move it somewhere else. I move it here. How do I know that that's 4? Because if this is a half step, G on the G string, this is a half step, from the G to the B string, always is. So also, why would I move that 4? Aren't there other notes I can move? For whatever reason, for me, the kind of awkwardness of that lick came from these two notes being next to each other. Maybe it's like my ring middle finger or picking it. Something is off about it. So I can kind of intuitively sense that. So I'm going to see if I can fix that problem by moving this note. And I'll move it here. And what do I get? 4, 3, flat 7. Now, for some people, this one might be the clear worse fingering, but for me, it's actually a lot better. I personally like shapes that are a little bit more of a stretch. It feels more comfortable for my hand. And also, I get to use a little bit of economy picking, which I do mostly, especially descending. But the other nice thing about this, not only is it more comfortable, it does put me in a different position than maybe I would, a different position that, let's say I'm like so used to just playing right here based off of this root or that root. This change of fingering forces me back here, which puts me in a different spot, but also opens up some other notes for me. So for example, if I want to do this, what did I do right there? That was 4, 3, flat 7. Then there was a 2 right here. 2 is pretty easily accessible. Now, of course, that's not a note we've been playing so far, but I'll mess around with it, see what happens. And I get a little 2 hammer on to 3. That's just naturally comfortable right here because of the fingering change. Could I do that with the original one? Not really, because where's the 2 in this location? This is flat 7 and 1, that's our root. 2 is here, so I can grab it, it's a bit of a stretch. But 2 is also right here, not really reachable with this particular fingering. I have to like jump with my pointer finger or something. With that one little fingering change, the 2 is now very easily accessible. So I can do a little hammer on or something else. That's kind of cool. What am I playing there? 4, 3, flat 7, 2, 1, 5. If you notice why I made that choice, because it's a consistent right hand structure. Watch what I'm doing. I'm going downstroke, upstroke, follow through, little sweep, downstroke, upstroke, follow through. It's a nice little pattern, kind of similar to what we did earlier, where I had a specific right hand pattern, like pick, hammer on, finger, finger. It's the same sort of idea. I'm keeping the same picking pattern, but changing the notes to fit within this sound. Pretty cool. So I got some different ideas. Now that I've got this one, though, I like that configuration of 4, 3, flat 7 instead 4, 3, flat 7. I'm now going to do this. Because I know I'm starting on 4, I know that's a 4 right there. I just found it. This is also a 4. So instead of doing this, why don't I do this same lick, but start on this 4? What would it look like? Of course, because of standard tuning, it'll look slightly different. I'll do this. That's the same as this, right? Different position. Again, this is going to open up new opportunities. Maybe I'll do this. For whatever reason, I felt that I kind of hammer on to say almost feels like I'm playing like an E chord right there. It's kind of what I'm thinking. But that's easily accessible for me right there for whatever reason. Just looking for these little opportunities to move around, right? So that's one of my favorite things about the guitar, really, is that there are so many different ways to play the same thing. And you might look at that as a negative, like, oh man, it's so complicated, which sure, it is a little bit complicated, more so than other instruments. But the nice thing about it is those different fingerings, just in their nature, because they look different, they feel different, they sound different, will yield new ideas. That's one of the best things about this is you can just change your fingering and all of a sudden, you get new ideas just by the virtue of the position you're in, what notes are available, what fingers you're using. And it's like you have this endless, well of ideas available to you just by messing around with fingerings, placing the notes in different spots. It really is pretty easy, honestly, to come up with ideas as long as you do this process, right? If you give yourself these rules or these little pathways to discover new ideas will be there. You just have to put that time in. So yeah, definitely changing fingerings, super valuable. Of course, you get some other things. One of my favorite things to do with fingerings is discover maybe different kind of chord shapes or things like that, different ways to hold the notes together. So for example, instead of doing this, I of course can do this. Talked about that a little while ago. So now with this in mind, I'm thinking, man, this is a really cool chord shape right here. I can also play this, flat 7, 1, 3, 4, flat 7 on top. I will immediately look at this and say, this is a cool chord shape. This is a nice sound. Maybe I want to develop this. So what am I going to do? This same sort of structure, but just move it around the guitar, try to match the sound. So instead of doing this, I'm doing a little hammer-on right here. What happens if I do a hammer-on off of the root? What would that look like? Maybe 1 to 2. I'll throw in a 2. Why not? I get this. This is 1, 2, 4, 5, 1. Super nice. This is the one I played. Let's keep moving back this this way. What would this be? Maybe 6 to flat 7, kind of filling out the sound, more of that full major sound. Then I play this. What am I playing right here? This is pretty cool. This is 6 to flat 7, 2, 3, and then 6 on top with the root. Really nice, like a huge dominant chord, like a dominant with a 6, dominant 13, some of these. And I'm just discovering these naturally by noticing, hey, this is a pretty cool chord shape that I discovered by messing with the fingering, right? Let me just kind of move this around the fretboard, see if I can match the notes to the sound. Nice. 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 I kind of did a hammer on from 5. That's cool. Or 6. Right? Just messing around with these sounds, locating these cool little chord shapes that I can use around the fretboard. And how did I get to these chord shapes? By messing with the fingering. This is what I'm talking about. Because you have so many different options by moving the notes around, different fingering will yield different ideas like these cool chords. Again, would I have maybe found those if I was just messing around? Probably not, but because I'm forcing myself to find new fingerings, new ideas come. So speaking of chords, there's one more thing we can do in here that I was doing earlier that's kind of cool. Again, it's just giving yourself a structure and seeing what happens. So if I'm here on my root, again, sticking to this sound, what is it? Dominant 7th, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, plus the 4. I notice this. Well, this is 1. Here's 4 and flat 7. That's kind of cool. I can just do that. And there's your chord. Okay, what would the next chord be as I move up? Well, it would, instead of 1, 4, flat 7, it'll be 3, 5, 1. Again, just abiding by the figure. Next string, what about this? 4, flat 7, 3, kind of cool. Next shape, 5, 1, 4. You see what I'm doing? This is kind of like a cascading series of events. By changing my fingering earlier, I discovered, hey, this is a cool chord shape. And then I discovered all these little chord shapes. And then I'm like, hey, let me just continue finding some chords. And I just give myself a template. What was the template? A note on the E string, A string, D string. And I just start running through them, seeing what I can find. Right? These are all pretty cool. And I'm just abiding by the concept or the structure of the sound in my head. Dominant 7th plus the 4, what this entire video is about. And I'm getting all these really cool ideas, just making sure I know the notes under my fingers. This first one, 1, 4, flat 7. If you remember, we kind of did that down here. Remember this? Right? We started with this figure, 1, 3, 4, flat 7. I'm just playing 1, 4, and then flat 7, just right here. Next chord, 3, 5, 1. Next chord, 4, flat 7, 3. This is a really cool one. Super unique. Maybe all 4 of them. Really strong sound. Turn down my volume just a touch. Cool. What about this one? 5, 1, 4. Nice, get little melodies. Basically a dominant 7 chord for the next one. Flat 7, 3, 5. Next one, again, just abiding by this pattern. A note, next string, next string. This will be 1, 4, flat 7. Suspended chord. Very nice. Hey, look at this. So plain old major triad, 3, 5, 1. Doesn't get simpler. Then we got this one. What is this? This will be our 4, flat 7, and then 3. Really cool. Same one as this, 4, flat 7, 3, just up an octave. And we get this final one right here. Right, this will be 5, 1, 4, suspended, like that. So we already, just by cycling through these, I'm not even thinking about anything, just cycling through the chords that I've discovered, I'm already getting melodies out of it. Hear that top note? Da-dum-bum. Already cool, right? Here's the next one. Da-da-dum. I hear that. Super cool. And again, these ideas are kind of coming up with themselves as I force myself to abide by this structure of developing chords. So yeah, I can talk forever about this stuff, but this is, in my opinion, the best way to approach this. You have a pool of sounds. And what is the sound? Always know what those sounds are. Dominant 7 in this case, 1, 3, 5, flat 7 plus 4. Really be comfortable finding those notes. Do not ignore the note locations. Don't just put your fingers down and say, I think this is correct. You want to say, no, this is correct because it's flat 7, 1, 3. And it sounds like a lot to think about only in the beginning. Once you get comfortable with this, it will be natural. You just trust the process. I promise you, as you do it, this stuff's going to get a lot more comfortable, a lot more familiar if you put the time in. I promise you. And then once you have that structure, force yourself to abide by some arbitrary rules. Right? What were my rules? Earlier, I was doing like a little finger picking pattern. Okay, that's rule number 1. See what I can come up with. Rule number 2, what was it? This little finger picking pattern I was doing. You know, pick, hammer on finger, finger. That's a rule, an arbitrary rule that I'm abiding by. Okay, then the next one was what? Create little chord shapes. Okay, abide by that rule. Create more chord shapes. None of those rules matter. You don't have to stick to any of them. They're just there as creative exercises. Because if you give yourself a template, like I'm going to write with this in mind, I'm going to write with these little chord shapes that are just stacked notes, and just force yourself to abide by what those notes would be in the sound, ideas naturally manifest. And you can then break out of those ideas. Like I'm playing a bunch of little chords right here. I don't have to use any of those. I can just maybe say, hey, this one's cool. And I'll just extract that from the exercise and use that and screw all the other ones. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter. You don't have to use them all. You're just doing this as an exercise to discover ideas that hit you hard, that are comfortable to play, that sound good, that you could then put in your playing. This is a super important part of developing sounds, especially if it's a sound that you're not that familiar with. And it's so easy to do. You just have to put the time in. So hopefully all this stuff makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions. See you in the next one.